Hi everyone, thanks for attending this afternoon. We're going to be getting started very soon, but while we wait for a few more attendees to log in, I'm just going to send out a quick poll for you all to answer to, and you can just click on the answer that applies to you by clicking on your screen there. So that should be on your screen now. Right, that's great, thank you. Okay, so good afternoon everyone. On the screen you'll see our agenda for the session today. After a few introductions, we'll start by covering frequently asked questions relating to the qualification before we cover issues relating to the individual units. You'll notice that there's a time close to the end of the presentation for questions, but I'd like to encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. And you can do this by typing in the question bar on your screen, and we'll try and make time after each topic to answer the questions before we move on to the next one. If we don't manage to fit them all in, we will be around for a little while after the webinar finishes to answer any of your queries. So before we make a start, I'm going to send out one more quick poll. I just want to get an idea of the experience of the attendees who are joining us this afternoon. Right, okay then, so we'll do a few introductions before we start. My name's Karen Taylor. I work in the curriculum team here at NCFE. The role of us in the curriculum team is to support centres with the planning and delivery of the VCERT qualifications. Our subject specialist, who's going to be talking through the specification with you today, is Amedeo Angelini. Amedeo is an external quality assurer, or EQA, for interactive media, and he's accessing the webinar remotely this afternoon. So,
hi everybody.
Yeah, we do have a lot to get through, so I'm going to pass you over to Amedeo and we'll get started.
Right, here's some general queries, questions that we'll go through, and I'll give typical answers for them. So, what are the advantages and benefits to learners who would be doing this qualification? The Level 2 Tech Award Interactive Media Qualification is the second generation of the media qualification, with refinements and improvements that enhance both the delivery and learning of the qualification. For the learners who wish to learn about the world of media and its production process, the qualification has 4 sequential progressions based on know, do, review and present. Each of the 4 internally assessed units develops a range of skills that can be applied to the real world of interactive media production. So Unit 1, investigate interactive media production, which is a guided learning hour of 30 hours. Unit 2, plan and prepare for an interactive media product, again guided learning hours 30. Unit 3, develop and production of an interactive media product, 40 hours. And finally, Unit 4, present and promote an interactive media product, 20 guided learning hours. The strength of this qualification is that it involves so many hands-on skills that keeps the learner engaged and enjoying the experience of developing their practical and creative talents. That can be used directly in many workplace projects. What are the benefits to the teacher and assessors in delivering this qualification? The benefits to the teacher and assessor are in the ease of delivery and assessment because of the sequential nature of the units. The teaching, delivery and assessment of the learner's tasks are easily completed by doing the knowledge base and internal assessment tasks of each of the learning outcomes in parallel. So typically you would deliver a similar project and then allow them to then move on to their internal assessment separately. This will allow the assessor to closely monitor and track the achievements and completion of each of the learning outcomes of the learners on a continuous basis, thus giving the assessor greater opportunity for intervention should the learner fall behind or not meet their expectation. What are the benefits to the school in delivering this qualification? By breaking down the teaching and learning delivery into individual learning outcomes, the teacher is able to feed back to the learner on how to make improvements to gain pass, merit and distinction, and this is when they're doing their practice work, and then immediately apply these skills when they're doing their assessment learning outcome, which should follow immediately after the learning outcome has been practiced. The benefits to the school are in the opportunity for successful outcomes at pass, merit and distinction, and learner engagement in the qualification is enjoyable, informative, practical and usable in the real world, It also offers many pathways into level 3 courses. Could we move on to slide 5, please? What are the requirements for the teacher and assessor to deliver the internal assess units to the learners? Internal assessment is discussed on pages 47 and 48 of the specification. This should be read by the teacher assessor. Essentially, as discussed previously, the learner must undertake each of the internal assessment learning outcomes independently from their practice units before. How do I prepare my learners for the external assessment? By completing all of the 4 internal assessments, the learner will have achieved all of the necessary skills and know what material evidence is required to complete the external assessment. And this will all be available in internal assessment portfolios. As this has not been created within the teaching period, but under controlled assessment conditions, this is allowed to be used in the external assessment for reference. So I've mentioned previously that it's units 1 to 4. In fact, so units 1 to 3 are directly relevant to the external assessment, unit 4 being the presentation one. So obviously that's not required for the final external assessment, which means you can meet both external assessment opportunities during year 11. Under what conditions is the external assessment to be sat? Within the specification document, there's a link on page 50 to the regulations for the control of conduct external assessment VCERTs. The exam officer and assessor should please read this carefully. There are a number of requirements, obviously, with regards to the external assessment. There's a time when the learners can access the internet, and there's a time when they obviously are not allowed to access the internet. When can my learners sit the external assessment? The external assessment Windows document can be found on the NCFE Level 2 Tech Award interactive media webpage of the product details page of the website. Teachers, assessors and exam officers should print this off at the planning stage of the qualification so they can build it into the delivery plan. All entries must be submitted before the cut-off date, which for the first one is the 7th of January 2019. And the first external window will open between the 21st of January 2019 and close on the 1st of March 2019. So there's about a 3-week opportunity for the learners to sit the qualification. Could we go on to slide 6, please?
Yeah, I was just going to have a look and see if we've got any questions, but none have come in yet. So if you have any questions at all that you'd like either myself or Amadeo to answer this afternoon, please get them typed into the question bar and we'll respond to that. One has just actually come in, that's from Ken. Which document has the link on page 50? So that's talking about the regulations for the conduct of external assessment. What we'll do after this, I do have a link to that document on this PowerPoint that we're using this afternoon. So I'll forward this out to attendees and you'll be able to access it that way as well. And Sarah's just asked Amadeo, are teaching staff allowed to be in the room for the external exam?
They can be in the room certainly, but then they can only conduct themselves as though they were an exam invigilator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's an invigilated assessment, isn't it? So
it is, yes. So in many respects, they cannot obviously assist the students in any way. They have to behave according to the rules and regulations laid down as an exam invigilator.
Yeah. Caroline's just asked, in the external assessment, do students actually make a finished product or is it just plans and sketches?
No, they will make a finished product within the 15 hour, but it's very streamlined, very cut down. So for example, if they were making a website, we wouldn't expect them to put in lots of text. They just use lorem ipsum. So in other words, they fill it with just jumbo, in other words, and just have the headings and the images and the videos that they would have created to go in it, and that would be fine. It's obviously to do with the typeface, the mood boards, in other words, the colour schemes that they're using, and obviously the content as in photographs, audio, video, and animation.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, and we've had another question in from Nick. Is a game appropriate for the external assessment, and what software would you recommend if so?
If you have a chance to look at the actual sample external assessment, you see we tend to base them around scenarios. So I think in the sample one, it was based around a water sports event. So you would have to obviously look carefully at that side of things. Yes, you could include a game within, let's say, a website, but that's only a small part of it. Remember that. So you can't have the students focusing completely on the game at the expense of the rest of the other elements that they have to produce within that web page, or if they were doing an app.
Yeah, I've got that assessment brief in front of me here. It says you've been asked by your local charity to produce a promotional interactive media product for a fundraising beach event. So the focus there is on promotional product, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, okay. So Caroline's asked, would they actually take original images and make the video for the website? If so, how would we monitor that?
Yes, they can. If you consider that you're doing this over a 3-week period, so the students, the learners technically could take photographs and bring them in and use them. There's no reason why they can't do that. That's something that they could do. It's similar to them going and doing the research on the internet. Now you might say the question is, well, is that included within the 15 hours? It's a difficult one to measure. I think in this case that they were bringing it in. They're not going to be using all of their own photographs, certainly. I'm sure they're going to be doing other forms of research, so you might add in 5 or 10 minutes, I don't know, within it, but that's fine. There's no reason why they can't, because in many respects, part of it is where they discuss the hardware that they could possibly use, so that could be whether it's computers, whether it's cameras, whether it's mobile phone cameras, and then they might want to talk a bit about the technical aspects of them as well.
Right, just before we move on, we've had another one in from Stevie Lee, who said, will the scenario be given to us and do we have to follow that? So this is about the assessment brief, isn't it?
Yes, and the answer is yes. We write the external assessment briefs. If you're talking about the external assessment brief, yes, that will be sent to your exams officer just as every other exam paper gets sent, and then that will be given out within the window. With regards to the internal assessments, no, you're certainly free to write your own internal assessments. You have to make sure that they cover all the learning outcomes.
Right.
You might need some feedback on that from NCFE, I think, who offer a free service.
Yes, the assessment check-in service is a service available to you. So if you have written an internal assessment and you want us to check that, you get one free. After that it is paid. You would have to pay for that. Sarah's just asked quickly before we move on again, can teaching of the subject still continue during the exam window? So during the assessment window?
Yes, yes. You could break it down into individual units, because obviously when they come to do the assessment, that's within an exam time. It doesn't mean to say the period before that they can't be being taught. That's entirely up to the school how you plan it.
So the assessment window is 3 weeks, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in many ways it's best for you to break it down so that the learners are given plenty of opportunity to refresh on what the next stages of the external assessment are going to be. And remember, they can take in their internally assessed work because it was done under conditions, exam conditions as well, albeit low level, but still done under exam conditions to refer to.
Do you know, I love these creative webinars because the questions that keep coming in are fabulous. So we've had another one in from Ken. So the 15-hour assessment then is to show planning, creation, review and presentation, etc. If the bulk of text is really to show that they would be including text in relation to, for example, pattern boarding, does the same apply to movies that they might make? So could they make a 60-second video stating that they would make, for example, a 5-minute one for the actual product?
Yes, that would be absolutely fine. But remember, it's not the only product that we'd expect to see on it.
So what was that?
Yeah,
what was
element.
that phrase you used, Amadeo, where they weren't going to use the actual words? You said something Latin earlier.
Lorem ipsum.
So does that apply to movies as well?
It applies to every web page that they have, apart from probably the first web page, which is going to be the home page. The rest of them just have the lorem ipsum script, which essentially they drop in there and it just fills the spaces.
Right.
We don't expect them to put lots of information in there, because that would take far too much time, and that's not what this is about. This is about us looking at the creative style. So we'll be looking at the text font type, the size and the colours, but not at the actual content of the information that they've got in there. That's not what we're looking for in terms of skills.
Yeah, Ken's just added to that by saying I would be expecting them to include, for example, graphics, animation, music, video, text and animation or transitions. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And is that what we've just talked about, the same for internal assessments?
Yes, but the same for internal assessment.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, I think we'll move on. We have had a couple more questions, but we will come back to them.
Okay. So if we go, we're now going to look at the individual units. Yeah. So Unit 1. So question, what sort of evidence do my learners need to produce to get a pass merit distinction? By cross-referencing the grade descriptors, delivery and assessment and types of evidence against the sample portfolios, the teacher assessor can develop their professional competence towards making grading decisions and use this as part of their CPD requirements. On the web page there are sample portfolios for Unit 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if you could have a look through them, you'll be able to see the difference between pass, merit and distinctions in terms of depth of knowledge and what the learners actually show. So Unit 1 gives a pass example, Unit 2 gives a merit example, Unit 3 is a merit stroke distinction, and Unit 4 is a distinction. So with regards to further examples, I will be showing you shortly some more examples from students. But if we go to the last question, what mediums can my learners use to produce their evidence? Your EQA should be able to give you, as the learners will be doing the majority of work on computers, the most sensible method would be electronically. Many centres use some form of platform like Ranger or Google Docs and set up their group accounts, which means they can access each of the learners' portfolios in order to track and monitor progress. This sort of approach makes the moderation visit much easier, as the EQA is able to sample the different learners' portfolios more conveniently. So remember that we do get samples, hard samples, but it's definitely worthwhile if your students are familiar with doing everything electronically. But we do like to see scanned-in work of their planning. So where they're coming up with design ideas, they might use mind maps, they might draw examples of what they're doing, they might sketch colour swatches to try and come up with ideas to match them up against target audiences, and that sort of thing can be scanned in. Hand drawings, for example, as well. So those sort of pieces of evidence can be scanned in and then included within the platform. Could we move on to slide 8? Slide 8. So this is an example of a learner's work where they are looking at what design brief can consist of. And I would say that that's probably a merit level. They've obviously got, and if you compare that to some of the learning criteria, you'll be able to see how that fits in against the past one that was previously given. So within Unit 1, remember that it's about investigating interactive media products. I've given you a number of slides here. Could we move on to slide 9, please? And again, this is another example of analysis of design brief, where the design brief is given, and then what we've got is the different aspects of how that design brief can be put together. Again, more or less at a merit level, because the student is looking at it, features, techniques and processes intended for the audience, which is quite important. Slide 10, please. So again, this is design brief constraints, where they're asked to look at in more detail what issues they might come across. Now in this one, it tends to be based around copyright and assets and intellectual property. And you could also include in this constraints such as bandwidth or the platform that it's going to go on. So you could be looking at, if you were designing something in a website, how will it translate over onto a tablet or onto a mobile device, and what sorts of software. Again, that could be constraints that could be looked at. You could be looking at the actual physical properties of the hardware you're using. So a good graphics card, for if you were designing it, do you have a good enough graphics card? Do you have a good enough processor? Do you have the right sort of hard drive? So it could be an SSD hard drive as opposed to normal hard drive, so you get much quicker accessibility to the RAM. How much RAM would you require? So this is the kind of stuff that takes you more into the distinction level, where there's a lot of discussion and thought and critical analysis and judgments based on how you can move forward with this. Okay, move on to slide 11, please. Again, this is showing you copyright, how they've broken it down and really discussed the different forms of copyright. Again, this is probably into distinction level, merit stroke distinction level. I'm showing you these so that you've got access to different forms of examples. Slide 12, please. I'm going through this quite quickly, by the way, but you will have copies of these slides. So again, secondary designs, showing you how they're looking at colour schemes now. So corporate identity, colour schemes, all important aspects of delivery. Slide 13, please. This time they're using a mobile app to try and discuss what features you could have in a mobile app, showing different types of ways of laying it out, and also the issues with regards to the size of the images and how you would navigate through it. Again, this is a kind of a thorough way of looking at the different platforms and obviously the constraints in the software you're using. Slide 14, please. I love this one, colour schemes. I mean, this is really quite clever. You can tell this person's definitely into art, and how they've broken down the different rainbow colour or spectrum of colour analysis here, which is extremely clever. And obviously that all goes towards the focus towards the kind of the clients that you're going to be designing your page towards. And then slide 15, please. Corporate ID, so now they're looking at logos with regards to the product that they will be doing, because obviously they're going to be creating a logo themselves as part of the graphic aspect of it. Okay, if we go on to slide 16. So, what NCFE documentation should the learner use? NCFE provide assessment documentation similar to the sample on the website. This documentation gives a framework that meets NCFE requirements such as overall unit grade, date submitted, teacher assessor signature, and learner signature of declaration. Now this is quite important when the external EQA comes out to look at. He'd like to see the portfolios have all got a front sheet that have all of this in it, so that he can say, right, I can see that the organisation of this course has been very good, and they can see when the learners are expected to finish it, although that's not the final outcome, at least it's part of the planning. 2, when should I assess and grade my learners' internal assessment evidence? The learner's work should be assessed to the date for the centre for 1 to 2 year planning cycle. So you have to build this in. Most centres have a 2 year planning cycle. Some, very few centres have a 1 year, so that would have to be looked at in a very different way. Grading decisions should be recorded on your tracking document and on the front sheet along with the feedback. So when they've completed the unit, you would grade it and then you would give them an overall mark for it. They can then go back and then improve on that for their second opportunity to increase or improve their grading. What IQA process should be done and when? The IQA process should be conducted immediately after the final assessment of each unit. Some centres have a more frequent internal system as part of their internal tracking, which could cross over with the NCFE requirements. NCFE also provide IQA documentation that will act as a framework for the NCFE requirements. As an EQA, when I come in, or when your EQA comes in, he wants to see your assessment records, in other words, the front sheet for each of the students that he's asked to sample with, as I said previously, the dates and signatures. And also he wants to see samples of the internal quality assurance where the IQA has asked for, and it could be several IQAs if it's several teachers that are doing it. It could be a teacher's IQAing their colleague and vice versa. But we would like to see that the IQA process is followed and the front sheets are for the IQA process documentation is filled in so that we can actually see what feedback the IQA is giving to the assessor and any actions that are required. Document 17, please.
Right.
So now we're going, sorry,
well, I was just going to say,
questions.
we've had loads. We've had absolutely loads. So I'm just going to have a look here. So we've had, let me see here. Right. Can they draw, then take a picture on their mobile?
Yes, of course they can.
Yep. Right, great. And Sarah's asked, if we've just tweaked the assignment task in the sample work, would it still be worth sending them into the assignment check-in service? What would you recommend for that, Amadeo?
Probably not, no, unless it was radical. If you're just tweaking it and it's following the exact same lines, then common sense dictates that you really probably wouldn't need to do that.
I think it's more just if you're writing it from scratch, isn't it?
Yes.
And if there is well, I was going to say if there is an issue, your EQA could talk through it with you on your first visit, but you know, that might be a bit too late at that point. So if you're in doubt, give us a ring here at NCFE. I'm going to put our curriculum email address at the end. So if you've got any questions at all, just forward them to us. Sabrina's asked, how do we get the slides? Right, Sabrina, at the end of the webinar, I've got to download the recording, then we've got to get that uploaded to YouTube. So if you give me a couple of days, I'll be able to email you a link to the recording, and I'll also email you the slides that we've used today, along with a transcript of the question and answers as well. So that'll be just in a few days after the webinar. Okay. Ken's asked, I've taken a focus on digital technologies for planning. Should I include off-key tasks as a matter of course?
So can you give me some examples of what it means by off-key tasks?
Right, I'll wait for them to come in. So Ken, if you could give us some examples, please. And Sarah's asked, will there also be remote sampling similar to the other VCerts? Is that something you've done, Amadeo?
It is something I have done, yes. I don't like to travel all the time from Bournemouth up to Liverpool, so in an ideal world,
yeah.
Yeah, in an ideal world, when where a centre is really robust and know what they're doing, then I'm more than happy to do remote EQAing. It just makes more sense. It makes it more streamlined.
Yeah.
Where a centre is uncertain of itself and needs some assistance and some more guidance, then obviously that's not wise for it to be done that way. But certainly when you're up and running and you're sure about what you're doing and you're happy with your results, by all means, remote EQA is probably the best way.
Yeah, it does just depend on the centre, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So just to back up Ken's question from earlier about off-key tasks. So for example, mind maps on paper and sketches.
Mm-hmm. So again, absolutely, that forms part of the evidence, certainly with regards to Unit 1 when they're looking at investigating, and then also in Unit 2 with regards to coming up with their design ideas. Yeah. So again, as somebody mentioned earlier, use your mobile phone to photograph it. Bingo, straight into your electronic version, and that's fantastic.
Brilliant. I'm just going back to see if I've missed some, because we've had absolutely loads that have come in. If I have skipped over one of your questions, don't worry, I'll be answering it. I'll be typing up examples. So when work is being submitted to more than one unit or task, should this be then submitted into different folders and named appropriately? So for example, Unit 1, LO1, and then saved again is Unit 2, LO2, for example? Or would you expect just to see it once?
Good. If you could reference it in the one document, if that makes sense. So for example, if it's covering both LO1 and LO2, if you could reference where it's taking place, that would be fine. It
so
just
more
makes it
on
easier
the
for
evidence
everybody.
grading tracker rather than on the document itself?
Well, even on the document itself, because obviously if we're coming into EQA and you've got several learning outcomes together, it might be worthwhile if you could just put in the margin LO1, LO2. Well, at least then you know you've covered it, as well as the learner knows they've covered it, and it just makes the EQA's job a bit easier as well.
Right. Okay. So Caroline's asked, when do we submit marks to the portal and what happens after this?
Okay, so you can submit marks to the portal, and remember it's based around the fact that you get 2 free EQA visits. Any more than 2, and that's per cohort, any more than 2, you then have to pay for the visit additionally. Some centres have used one of their moderation visits as a CPD, where they want the moderator to come in and just go through the whole product with them. But normally what you would do is, in an ideal world, you would complete a unit or maybe a couple of units and then get the EQA to come in so that you are happy with what you're doing, and then you would then either resubmit those units for improvements along with the other 2 units on the second EQA visit. That would be an ideal way of doing it, but perhaps for the very start, for some centres who are feeling a bit insecure, they might want to have an additional visit and use one of their visits as a CPD session, almost as a trial session.
So once the marks have been uploaded to the portal, it's then up to the centre to arrange a visit, isn't it?
Well, what will happen is the marks go into the portal, the EQA is automatically notified of it. The EQA will then contact the centre and or vice versa, and you'll agree a date, usually within a few weeks or 3 or 4 weeks of the grades being entered into the portal, because obviously you'll want to get as much feedback as quickly as possible on it and get those grades either banked or rejected if they either have to be put up, as in some cases they do, or brought down accordingly.
I mean, you can plan your EQA visit before you've uploaded any marks, can't you? It would make sense to have your visit planned well in advance so that you know you've got a deadline to work to, because we were just talking before about how busy you are at this time of year, weren't we?
Yes. Now, ideally in your 2-yearly planner, where you've got your assessment dates and your IQA dates, I would suggest that you put in your EQA date after your second unit, or even after your first unit, if that's the way you want to do it. But remember, your second visit would be to look at making improvements on your first unit and submitting units 2, 3 and 4. Remember, you get 2 shots at submitting, so that's something to remember. You can always improve them further.
Right, so Sabrina's asked, well, she said, you were referring to design briefs in Unit 1, but this does not begin until Unit 2. Is that right?
I think the design brief we were looking at was just the understanding of what a design brief is, more than the actual design brief itself.
Right, so it's
which is in Unit 2. Yeah.
Right. Stevie Lee's asked again, can they use ready-made products such as animations or movies?
Yes, they can, but we would expect them to have put them through their own sort of adjustments, if that makes sense. Because remember, part of Unit 3 is about showing how you've developed the products, the elements, how you develop the elements. And we will see that further on down when we come to look at Unit 3.
Right. I think we're just about ready to move on to Unit 2, but Sarah's just asked to clarify, is it 2 per cohort or 2 per academic year, as other VCerts are 2 per academic year? It should be 2 per cohort, regardless of the VCert. It's 2 per cohort, isn't it?
It's all 2 per cohort, yes, definitely.
Yeah. Regardless of the VCert, it's 2 per cohort. It might be that if you've had rolling registration, so you've had registered year after year, it might feel like you get 2 per academic year, because in that case you would. But if you just registered your learners once for a one-off 2-year delivery, you would just get 2 EQA visits. So Sabrina's asked, what are EQA, IQA and assessment visits? That's a big question, isn't it? So your external quality assurance visits, that's what Amadeo would do. So subject experts coming into your school to have a look at the work that learners have produced. But before that, you would have IQA'd the work, so internally quality assured your work, and that's something that would happen in the centre. And your assessment visit, I'm guessing that's just another term for your EQA visit. Does that sound about right, Amadeo?
No, what was meant there was it's not an assessment visit, it's the assessment
support visit.
The support visit's separate, yeah, that's separate again. Yeah.
So Sarah's asked, also do EQA visits cover all 4 units, and what sample size do they look at?
It can, if you submit all 4 units within the portal, then the EQA visit will cover all 4 units. The sample size depends on the number of learners that you have. So typically, it's probably no smaller than 5, but can then go up to, you know, easily 9 or 10, depending if you've got 50 or 60 or 70 students or more.
Yeah, we usually say for the first visit for a new centre it could be up to 50%, but after that we'll look at what, say, a square root, so a nice easy number, 25, you would be looking at 5.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for engineering, I'm sure for engineering, Unit 1's quite big, isn't it? So what we usually find is that people would get Unit 1 done and then do an EQA visit, make sure that everything they're on track, and then maybe do Units 3 and 4, because it's Unit 2's the exam, isn't it? And put them together. Is there a similar sort of scenario for this, with them having 4 different units? What would you expect to see maybe in your first visit?
Well, that's a good question. Because it's a new qualification and because it's so streamlined, it's very different to the engineering, which, you know, Unit 1 sat separate.
Yeah.
Unit 1, 2 and 3 are the ones that are required for the external assessment. So you have to make a professional judgment based on your own self-confidence about what you're doing. So I would be loath to offer you advice. I think you really have to think carefully. When you're delivering Unit 1, do you feel confident about what you're doing? Do you need to then get an EQA visit as soon as Unit 1 is finished and you've entered the grades onto the portal? Or would you be happy enough to go forward and do Unit 2 and Unit 3 and then call in an EQA visit, so that on your second visit you would then have room to improve all of those units, and then finally Unit 4 with that as well?
Yeah. I think it would be useful for us to move on to the different units. We do have some really good questions coming in. Just quickly to answer Sabrina's, how do we get a contact email for our EQA? As soon as you register your learners, Sabrina, within 5 working days you should have contact from your EQA. So that's the process there. Very quickly, we've had another one. Is it okay for students to use Wix to help them make their website?
Yes.
Yeah, right, great. There are questions here. I know we haven't answered all of them. Sorry, go on.
Just to interject there, talking about using software, as part of their research, the discussion should be on about the different kinds of software they could use and comparing the different sorts of software. So for example, if they were doing a web page, they might compare Dreamweaver to Wix and talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each, or even using HTMLX as well, and again talking about the advantages. So this is part of the greater depth of discussion that can give them the higher grades, but they would certainly need to compare the softwares that they could use as part of the research, and then ultimately come to a decision about which one they're going to use in Unit 2.
Yeah, so Sabrina's just said, does using Wix lower their marks due to the reduced skill set? But I'm assuming if they're backing that up with a thorough analysis as to why they've used it, that wouldn't be the case.
Exactly. We don't expect them to be, especially at their age, to be expert programmers with regards to making web pages. So we have to remember that these are teenagers who are 15 or 16 years old, and fair dues to them, some are extremely good, but at the end of the day you've only got a limited amount of time to do it in, so you have to look at what is going to be, I suppose, the quickest way to produce the best product.
Great. Right, okay, so we're going to move on to Unit 2 now. Because we've got 20 minutes left. We've been answering so many
I think I'm going to have to fly through this then, shall I?
So, I think so.
Yeah.
I'll be ready to change the slides as soon as you indicate.
Okay, so if you go to slide 18, yes, lovely, thanks. So what does Unit 2 cover? So it's plan and prepare for an interactive media product. So it's about developing their ideas and proposing a product. Can the evidence be discussed as part of investigation in Unit 1? Now we've spoken about that already, and I suppose yes, in many respects you could have a crossover where they just continue with the flow of what they're doing and then include that as part, but it would be nice to see that clearly marked as being Unit 2, again from the EQA and from your own assessment point of view. Can the learners create a table to show their planning? Yes, using a table may be more visually easy to interpret, especially if the timings are given for each of the elements of the learning outcomes. So within the external assessment, it does give you the timings, so why not use them? This will encourage the learners to be more critical in their planning. So we get nothing about, no worry about them using tables. It just helps them lay things out tidier, maybe gives them more opportunities to think a bit more carefully about what they're saying. Okay, slide 18, please. Okay, so this is us into Unit 2 where we're just fly through these. You will have access to them, so please don't worry about not reading what's in them just now, but see, these are examples for you. Slide 20, please. Statement of intent, so this is where the person decided that they're going to create a website. Slide 21, please. Target audience, so this is where they have decided who their target audience is going to be. Slide 22, please. So secondary research into logo designs. Again, it's a bit of a crossover from Unit 1. Slide 23, please. Again, sketch drawings where, as we spoke about, using your mobile phone. Again, a discussion about the different sketches and which one they are going to use and why, which one's going to be most relevant. Slide 24, please. Again, this kind of rolls over from Unit 1 explanation of corporate ID, talking about the colour scheme that they've chosen, why they've chosen it, talking about the text for title, subtitle, and the typeface that they're using. And slide 25, please. And here we have a navigation map to show how the person is going to navigate. It's quite a complicated one, this, but it could be drawn by hand equally as well, totally acceptable. You want to do questions now?
That was the quickest run through of a unit ever. Yeah, we've had a load more questions. I'm just going to load them up on my screen here so I can actually read them. Right. So I'm just going to scroll back up to go back to where we're left off from. So Ken's asked, if we've used one EQA visit for CPD, then we submit to the portal. The students have two opportunities to submit their work. The EQA checks the work online to verify grades. Then they could rework if their grade is low. Does this mean that the second EQA visit has been used? Yes, it does. So you get your 2 EQA visits per cohort, and just referring back to an earlier question from Sarah, how does this work over 3-year delivery? You would just have to plan your visits accordingly. So there don't have to be 2 visits in 1 year. You could do a visit, if you had a 3-year Key Stage 4, you could do a visit in year 10 and year 11. You could do one in year 9 and in 1 year 11. It's completely up to you. But if once you've used those 2 visits, if you use one as a support visit and one as an EQA visit, any additional visits would have to be paid for. So it's really worth seriously considering whether you do actually want to use one of your visits as a support visit or not. That is there available to you, but just be aware that if you do that, really you're going to end up paying for that service. Robert's asked, can you confirm they can do an external assessment before the students have done Unit 4?
Yes, because Unit 4 is just about them essentially presenting it. I suppose you maybe want to think a bit about the review, which is, and we'll come on to that, which is part of Unit 3, is it? Hold on, let's double check. Develop and production of interactive media product. Review. Yeah, no, it's within Unit 3. Yeah. So Unit 1, 2, and 3 would be adequate to get them to the assessment point for the external assessment, and Unit 4 is purely on their skills to understand what presenting your work to a customer or a client is about, and the skills involved in it plus doing it.
So you could have delivered the content from Unit 4, but the learners don't actually have to have completed Unit 4. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Right. Great. Okay, so Ken's asked, would they be unable to get a distinction if we don't use HTML, as we've used both DW and Wix and compared these products?
No, I think the distinction is about their ability to be able to look into the product, analyze it, and be able to break it down. And depending on the depth of their discussion and their argument is where your distinction comes in. In Unit 3, certainly, when they're actually making the product, it's more about us seeing what they've used within creating the elements rather than the whole thing. So they could easily have achieved a distinction within showing the depth of content within developing one of their elements, as long as it covers all the learning outcomes.
Great. Ken's asked a couple of questions here. Do students have to use Gantt charts for planning?
No, they don't have to use Gantt charts. Again, they could use a table if they wanted to.
Great. And the slides 20 to 25 that we'll just quickly whiz through there, what level would you say those examples were?
Again, I would say it's probably about merit.
About merit. Great. Okay, I'll make sure that's on the PowerPoint when it goes out. So when is it best for students to create their product? After which unit would work best?
Well, Unit 3 is actually about development and production of their product. So that is where they would do it.
Right. And a few people have asked how much are the additional visits. Now I believe a half-day visit is £325. But if you want to send me an email after this, we can discuss options as to how we can get around that and what we can do to support you. I'm just aware of how little money schools have these days to be thrown around on CPD, because that would get you an awful lot of resources. Right, if they create a Google Doc for Unit 1 and record evidence there, can they then move to using a PowerPoint for Unit 2 to 3? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely fine, yeah.
And I think someone asked... Sorry, go on.
They can use presentation PowerPoint within Google Docs as well.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a similar question to an earlier one. Can they change to a website if they've based Unit 1 on a PowerPoint? So is it all right to change between methods?
Well, absolutely fine, yeah, because Unit 1 is just, I mean, if you could look at it from the point of view, Unit 1 is about the research side of things. So if they were putting it, whether it was on a Word document that just went on and on, or on a PowerPoint, absolutely fine. How they present it doesn't matter, as long as it's presentable.
Great. So if students fail one learning outcome and get a distinction in everything else, do they fail? So I think that's reference to the current VCerts that are the mastery model.
No, it's different now.
But this one is it's a funny little hybrid, isn't it, between the existing older models and the brand new model, which is the combined, and it is compensatory, this one. So one learning outcome isn't going to affect the whole overall grade. This one is a compensatory model. Right. I think I might have skipped a couple, but that has been by accident. So we're going to move on to Unit 3 now. There we go.
So slide 27, yeah. So what does Unit 3 cover? Unit 3 is how the learner shows their ability to develop and create an interactive media product through showing skills and using software to create the product, as well as showing some technical knowledge on the different electronic format, comparison of similar software, their tools and hardware with regards to their chosen audience. Can the evidence be discussed as part of investigation in Unit 1? Not really. If the learners are trying to combine this area of evidence, it would probably end up sounding very confused and disjointed. It's probably best kept separate. And can the learners create a table to show their comparisons between different software and hardware features? Yes, using a table may be more visually easy to interpret, especially if the learner is comparing similar software packages and hardware components such as a mobile phone camera and SDLR camera. Okay. Next slide, 28. So now I'm going to show you some examples of, there we go. So how I made my logo. So this is typical of showing, now I'm not showing you all the aspects of the evidence that are required for Unit 1, 2 or 3. I'm just picking out samples for you. So this is actually them showing you how they've gone through using the software components, explaining how they've used the tools within it to create the various products. So if we move on to slide 29, please. And there we are. So this is obviously creating their logo, and it shows you how they've actually done it. And again, if this learner was to do this with several different elements, then I would say that's probably at distinction level. Okay, if we move on to any questions now.
Yes, more questions. Right, hang on, let me just get this open here. Right, so let me scroll back up. We've answered that one. So for Unit 1, do they have to do video experimentation as software is limited?
No, the answer is they don't have to do video experimentation. Remember, Unit 1 is where they investigate. They could use images, they could use animations. It doesn't mean to say they need to use videos. They could actually do, take a print screen of a video clip and then discuss the video clip. It's about the discussion, remember. It's not about the actual clip itself. It's about their understanding of it in terms of media production and audience and platform.
Great. And I've got a question relating to Unit 3, I think. Do they have to make a logo, or can they just modify an image?
Again, it's down to what level do you want them to get? Because remember, if you want them to get a pass merit distinction, they're going to have to show certain levels of skills. If you just want them to, yes, they could take an image, but as long as they show that they can use technical skills to manipulate that image, that would be equivalent to either a pass merit distinction, that's fine.
I was going to say that. I was going to say surely it depends on what they do with the image. I mean, if they just duplicate it and put some writing over it, then, you know, that's probably not going to be that demanding. Now Sarah's asked a brilliant question here. If you have a reluctant writer, can they record themselves making it, verbally explaining as they go?
I am totally in favour of that way of doing it, because in many respects we're meant to be making education much more accessible. So it's about knowing that the student or the learner knows what they're talking about. Just because they're a poor writer doesn't mean to say that we should, you know, disadvantage them in any way. So certainly if they're able to talk about it and you've got audio evidence, then providing that you can guarantee it's from them and not from someone else, then certainly that's great.
Yeah, really good question, and that's applicable to all the visits. You know, if you can just get that evidence any way you can. Right, so Caroline's asked, if students say they're making a talent show to be seen on E4, would they be okay to use the E4 ident? I'm assuming that's identification.
They're not doing this for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
As long as they, as we said previously, they recognise, you know, in one of the slides previously, the learner was talking about different forms of copyright legislation and such like. So in many respects, as long as they recognise it and obviously make the point that they're using it, but it's not for commercial purposes.
I mean, if they're doing a talent show, I'm assuming they're going to be thinking about the logo and branding for the talent show. So the E4 logo is not really going to be a big part of it, is it?
No, it'd be part of the research more than anything else. And unless they want to take the logo and then manipulate it to turn it into their own logo, which is different.
Yeah. Sabrina's asked, the example slides you've used, can we get a copy of those? Yes, you will be getting this exact PowerPoint that we're going through today. It wouldn't be the exact student work, the full body of student work, but you will be getting what we've looked through today. So do students have to have a list of where they got all their assets from? So declaring copyright and how they've overcome any copyright issues?
I've seen this in other qualifications. The answer is no, because I think what we're looking at is about them looking to see, is the image suitable, or here's an image I could use, here's the pros and cons for it, and then in Unit 2, which ones are going to use and why they're going to use them. So about identifying it, I think copyright comes as separate to that. So there wouldn't be an issue at that point in time.
Yeah. They
can certainly say where they got it from. There's no harm in saying, I took this photograph using my mobile phone, which has got 20 megapixel camera in it, you know, which is fine. Or alternatively, they could say that I went to on the web Google search and found these images, or I went to this website, or I found this within this photo montage, whatever. But certainly they don't have to spend lots of time registering all that, because at the end of the day, although they have researched it from the point of view, we're not asked them to tell us where they got it from, because we're not going to chase them up about that.
Great. I've had a few questions in about a Marc Scheme for the internal assessments. So the Marc Scheme is actually, you will find that in the specification, and the grading descriptors are at the end of each LO content, and that's what you would use to actually grade the internal assessment. You do have a glossary of terms at the back of the specification as well. I think that's on page 58 and 59. That gives you a little bit more detail, but as far as a separate Marc Scheme goes, there isn't one. It's basically what you see in your specification.
Yeah, and just to back you up on
email. You're obviously so knowledgeable that Sabrina wants your email to obviously reference and pick your brains. I think we'll have to wait until you're registered, Sabrina. I'm not sure if you already are, but we'll have to see who you were allocated as an EQA. You never know. You might be lucky and you might get Amadeo. Right. Okay. We have got quite a few questions, but I am aware of the time. So shall we quickly go through Unit 4, and then if anybody does need to dash off at 5, they can, and we'll see if we can cover the rest of the questions at the end. Is that okay? Is that okay, Amadeo?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fine by me, yeah, because Unit 4 is a short one.
Yeah.
Okay, so what does Unit 4 cover? Unit 4 is how the learner shows their ability to present an interactive media product to their client against the original brief. There's several parts to it, and if I just quickly go through the learning outcomes, is understand how to promote their skills and present an interactive media product. Present an interactive media product. And review, so it's know, do and review. That's why it stands alone in many respects. Can the evidence be discussed as part of the investigation in Unit 1? No, the evidence does not relate to the investigation in Unit 1. This will have to be separate investigation into the ways and methods of presenting to different clients, considering their location and needs, as well as understanding what sort of skills the learner will need to develop in order to present using different methods of delivery. So it all depends about who your client's going to be, where they're located in the world, as we're doing right now using a webinar, similarly. Can the learner create a table to show their skills requirements against different presentation methods and client needs? Yes, again, a table would be visually easier to interpret and present such a set of comparisons. Questions?
Right, I'm going to very, very quickly move on to the external assessment, because I did reference this earlier and you referenced this earlier as well, Amadeo, the regulations for the conduct of external assessment. So when you get this PowerPoint, that is actually a hyperlink. So if you click on that little image that's on your screen now, this one here, that will take you to where that document is. Another document that's really important for you to have a look at is the qualification specific instructions for delivery, which we call the QSID because it's far easier. But that does have information relating to specific qualifications for the interactive media qualification. There's information about how evidence can be submitted and in what format, so it's a really useful document to you. We do have two questions regularly. What do I do if my learners need reasonable adjustments? There's a reasonable adjustments and special considerations policy there. We have recently, NCFE have recently joined JCQ, but we are in the process of aligning with their processes, so you will need to still use our documentation for now. If a learner is unwell and unable to attend the external assessment, does this count as an attempt? So if a learner misses the full 3-week window, as long as they haven't seen that assessment brief, that wouldn't be counted as an attempt. But any further questions about that, you can contact us on our email address, which I've put on the screen there now. So we've gone just over the time, so if anybody does have to dash off, then that's absolutely fine. I will be typing up answers to these questions, but I'll see if we can cover as many as we can now. Right, so can learners save all evidence in a Google document as opposed to having saved external files? Is that something that you've come across, Amadeo?
When you say external files, you're talking about hard copy?
I'm not massively certain, to be honest with you. I'm not sure can we Google the whole portfolio as opposed to saving files in different places? That's the same person, that's Sabrina again, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Google Docs essentially can be all stored in the one place.
Yeah.
Usually what you do is you set up Google Docs to a group, and then as you allocate a document, it then gets shared amongst all the group within their individual folders, which they can access and you can access, but they can't access each other's folders. And that way, that maintains the sort of the confidentiality of it all. But there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to just be in one solid Google Docs thing. I'm not sure. The only thing I'd maybe query is if, and I'm not sure how Google Docs would handle big video files. So you'd need to watch out for that one. Maybe the final presentation.
Yeah, Caroline's just said my students have created a blog and posted their Google Docs evidence. Is that okay? For internal assessment, I believe that is okay, but I will get clarification from our quality assurance team and I'll include that on the answer to your question on the transcript that I send out. Stevie Lee's got my way of thinking as well. She wants to collaborate. She wants to share email addresses. Now, that's not something that I would do but just data protection and all that kind of thing. But Stevie Lee, if you email me, actually I'll email you, or you can reply to the email that I sent to you. And if you do want to try and connect with schools local to you, I'll do a little bit of investigation to see who is close to you and see if they wouldn't mind sharing email addresses, so I can do that on your behalf. Can we check over schemes of work? So that would be nice, I think, if it's from the same person, to get some peer-to-peer networking going on. Would be great to share resources with other schools. Now, Ken's just asked, and I'm not sure where this has been referenced, Amadeo. I'm losing track a little bit. There's that many questions coming in. So just to clarify, if we are doing Ninja Warrior as part of our overall investigation throughout this course, are you saying that we need to change the theme for Unit 4?
And I'm going back to a further question when one of the questions was, if we write our own brief, would we need to get it checked? And they then went on to say, but if we keep it as near as the brief, the example brief.
Ken's just backed that up. There was a reference saying that it could not relate to Unit 1. So I think that was when you were talking about, can the evidence be discussed as part of the investigation in Unit 1 for Unit 4?
And the answer is no.
And the answer is no. So it does have to be different.
Yeah, Unit 4 almost stands on its own. It's no do review, but it's about complete,
So I hope that answers
it's just about the presentation model.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question, Ken. Right. Sabrina, I think we'll finish this one. We'll finish on this one because we are going a bit over time, and I think we have covered most of them. So what are your top 5 tips for getting students to get top marks in terms of evidence they produce? I don't know
Depth
about top. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, depth of content of their explanation. So, and this is where you can see the difference between the past, merit and distinctions, is when so for example, if they were discussing what different type of platform they're going to use, let's say it was a website, they were going to use an app, or they were going to use a tablet, for example, although you could argue that tablet's still be a website, but it's talking about different sizes in that case. There would be the level of discussion they have about each one, and of course that would reference the target audience, the type of people who use these products, these hardware products, that is. So it's all to do with the depth of explanation, and that's clear the way we see it. And obviously with regards to the Unit 3, then it would be down to the level of technical skills, and again, explanation of the technical skills they're using and why they're using them. Yeah.
Great. Right, Sabrina's just asked, well, I've got a couple of people sharing their email addresses. I've got your email address. When you register for the GoToWebinar, I get all of your email addresses, so I know exactly who to send everything to. So I've got your email addresses. My name's Karen Taylor, but you can respond to me, or the email that's on your screen there, curriculum@NCFE, that comes to me. So I'll be able to pick up anything that comes through. I think I'm fairly certain we will have lost the odd question along the way as I've been scrolling down. But I think we've covered most things. If I haven't, I'll be typing up answers and we'll be sending them out to you, like I said, over the next couple of days. But I'd like to say thank you for making the webinar so interactive today. Your questions have been fabulous, and I'm sure we've tested Amadeo. But I'd like to say thanks to Amadeo as well for your time this afternoon and your knowledge. And I hope it's been useful to everybody. So you've got our contact details now. Any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And good afternoon. I hope you enjoy the lovely sunshine we've got here. Okay.
Fantastic.
Right. Okay then. Good afternoon, everyone.